plane was flying over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it suddenly ran out of fuel. The pilot could only watch helplessly as the engine sputtered to a halt. From the cockpit, they could see nothing but a vast empty ocean. On that dark night, 306 people found themselves plummeting from an altitude of 10,000 meters, facing the desperate prospect of crashing into the deep sea. Why did this plane suddenly run out of fuel? How could the captain save everyone in such a critical situation and the precious lives of his passengers? Hello everyone, I'm the Gearhead. Today I'm going to tell you the true story of Air Transat Flight 236, August 23, 2001. In bustling Toronto, Pearson Airport was experiencing its evening rush of departures. An Airbus A330-200 was being refueled. It was scheduled to carry 293 passengers as Air Transat Flight 236 from Toronto to the Portuguese capital, 6,350 kilometers away, Lisbon. Captain Robert P. Shea, after inspecting the aircraft's engines, had returned to the cockpit. Back in the cockpit, he began pre-departure preparations with his first officer. Robert P. Shea was born on November 5, 1952. By his teens, he had already learned to fly a plane. As an adult, he logically pursued a career in aviation. Flying in the harsh conditions of Quebec, he honed his exceptional piloting skills. But the good times didn't last. Due to financial trouble, Air Quebec was forced to lay off employees, and Captain P. Shea lost his job. He had lost his source of income. Pressured by his associates, he began flying a plane to transport marijuana from Jamaica to the United States. On June 21, 1983, P. Shea was flying a Piper when he landed at a small airport in Georgia. He was met by police officers who had been waiting for him. They found over 220 kilograms of marijuana on the plane. P. Shea was sentenced to 10 years in prison. After serving 18 months of his sentence, P. Shea was paroled for good behavior. He returned to Quebec, Canada. In 1995, Air Transat was expanding rapidly and was in urgent need of experienced pilots. Despite his criminal record, Air Transat still hired the experienced P. Shea as a pilot. In 1999, the airline introduced the new A330-200 aircraft to its fleet. P. Shea consequently completed his transition training from the L-1011 TriStar to the A330-200 in the year 2000. That same year, he was promoted to captain. At the time, it was a very advanced wide-body airliner. The A330 only required 2 pilots for a transatlantic flight. The other pilot on Flight 236 was First Officer Dirk de Jager. The young first officer was only 29 years old, with 4,800 flight hours. The year before the incident, he had completed his transition training for the A330. Throughout his career, he had maintained a perfect flight record. At 20:52 local time in Toronto, Air Transat Flight 236 took off with 46.9 tons of fuel. The weather was clear that day. After flying over Lake Ontario, the plane climbed to its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. The 2 pilots in the cockpit relaxed. According to the flight plan, in 6 hours, Flight 236 would arrive at its destination, Lisbon. However, the pilots were unaware that the fuel line to the right-side engine had a hidden, undetectable flaw. In just 4 hours, this flaw would seal the fate of their flight. A week earlier, on August 15th, the airline's maintenance crew, during a routine inspection, found metal debris in the oil system of the aircraft's number 2 engine. During an inspection the next day, they again found metal fragments. Unable to determine the source of the debris, the airline decided to replace the aircraft's number 2 engine. A Rolls-Royce spare engine happened to be in storage at a Quebec warehouse. Air Transat prepared the spare engine for installation. The engine replacement began at midnight on August 17th. First, the engineers had to remove the original engine, prepare all the necessary parts, then install the replacement engine, connect all the systems, and finally, test the engine. All of this work needed to be completed within 48 hours. Time was tight and the task was urgent. A problem at any stage could prevent the plane from being ready for its flight in 2 days. And, as fate would have it, when the engineers were installing a hydraulic pump on the replacement engine, they discovered that the spare engine was fitted with an older model hydraulic pump. The new hydraulic pump, taken from the original engine, conflicted with the fuel line and could not be installed on the spare engine. Subsequently, the engineers used 3 different computers to look up the correct pipe configuration on the company intranet, but for some reason, the server denied them access. Meanwhile, the work was falling significantly behind schedule. Since the hydraulic pump couldn't be installed due to the pipe conflict, they figured, why not modify the pipe a little to make it fit? In their desperation, the engineers took the advice of an engine expert. They installed the mismatched hydraulic pump and the fuel line that was in the way. During the subsequent test run, the engine showed no problems. Because it was the weekend, there was no quality control inspector on site during the engine replacement. The work on the aircraft was signed off without a final check. Late Sunday night, the technicians happily called it a day and went home. 4 hours after Air Transat Flight 236 took off, it had flown over the center of the Atlantic Ocean. While routinely checking the aircraft's instruments, the crew noticed a strange problem. The oil quantity in the right engine was much lower than the left, and the oil temperature and pressure were abnormal. After consulting the manual, the crew could not find any description of this unusual combination of warnings. They had to use the high-frequency radio to contact the maintenance center for help. After looking into it, the engineers informed the crew that they didn't know what was causing the anomaly. After some discussion, the crew decided that since the engine's other readings were completely normal, the 3 abnormal oil readings were most likely caused by a faulty sensor generating an error. In reality, however, this unusual signal was due to a fuel leak from the right engine. When the engine was replaced, the engineers, although they installed the mismatched hydraulic and fuel lines, left what they thought was enough clearance. But they didn't consider that the flexible hydraulic line would deform when the system was pressurized. This caused the 2 lines to make hard contact. The high-frequency vibrations from the engine caused the point of contact on the fuel line to develop a fatigue fracture. This formed an 80 mm long, 2.5 mm wide L-shaped crack. Half an hour before the crew noticed the oil abnormality, fuel from the right wing tank had already started leaking out. So, why didn't the crew notice the fuel imbalance during their checks? Here's why. The A330-200 aircraft, to maintain its center of gravity during flight, has a trim tank located in the rear horizontal stabilizer. An automated fuel distribution system monitors the aircraft's center of gravity and transfers fuel forward from the rear tank. This is the crucial part. The fuel being transferred forward was replenishing the leaking right side tank. So, according to the gauges, the fuel tanks on both sides always appeared to be balanced. A plane was flying over the mid-Atlantic Ocean when it suddenly ran out of fuel. On this dark night, 306 people at an altitude of 10,000 meters were suddenly thrown into a desperate fight for survival high above the ocean. At 5:33 UTC, the fuel tanks were nearly empty. A warning message suddenly appeared on the instrument panel. The crew found that the fuel on the right side of the plane was higher than on the left side by a full 3 tons. So to solve this problem, they opened the crossfeed valve. They turned off the fuel pump in the right tank and established a fuel supply channel from the left tank to the right. In the case of a fuel line issue, the manual states pilots should not use the crossfeed valve. However, When an abnormality in the system occurs, the crew assumed it was a sensor calculation error. And in the manuals at the time, if the plane had a fuel imbalance, it did not require the pilot to suspect a fuel leak. So the captain didn't consider the possibility of a fuel leak when trying to diagnose the problem. Before the cross-feed valve was opened, only one tank was leaking fuel. But after it was opened, the fuel in the left tank also began to drain out through the leaking right engine. Although the A330 was a very advanced aircraft at the time, it gave no clear warning to the pilots that the plane had a fuel leak. To confirm the issue, the captain asked a flight attendant to observe the left and right wings from the cabin to see if there was a visible fuel leak. Due to the darkness of the late-night flight, it was difficult to see. Plus, the fuel was leaking from inside the engine. The flight attendant was completely unable to see that the plane was leaking fuel. After the crew learned there was no abnormality from the visual inspection, the co-pilot asked whether to execute the fuel leak procedure. That procedure would require shutting down the engine on the leaking side and descending to 20,000 feet. At this point, the captain could not determine which side the fuel was leaking from. He believed that if the leak was real, then in any case, he couldn't stop the plane's fuel from continuously decreasing. If he followed the checklist procedure, the altitude and speed lost by the plane after shutting down the engine would be certain to reduce their gliding distance. Humans often have an instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. From the very beginning, Captain Piché thought the plane's sensors were malfunctioning. From this point of view, he preferred to believe the fuel reduction was a computer error rather than an extremely rare fuel leak. So in this case, the captain did not immediately execute the fuel leak procedure. To some extent, this psychological factor was at play. 10 minutes after the cross-feed valve was opened, the instruments prompted the pilots that the fuel on the plane was no longer enough to reach their destination in Lisbon. Facing a low fuel emergency over the Atlantic route used by Flight 236 only had the Lajes Airport in the Azores as a viable alternate. The crew notified the Santa Maria Oceanic air traffic controllers by radio that they were diverting. To prevent a possible fuel leak from the right fuel tank, the captain turned on the right fuel pump and turned off the left fuel pump. By doing so, the fuel tank on the right started to supply fuel to the left engine. This avoided fuel in the left tank from flowing into the potentially leaking right fuel tank. It was now 5:59. The plane only had 4.2 tons of fuel left. The airline's headquarters suspected there might be a leak in the plane's left fuel tank. The captain followed their advice and turned off the right fuel pump again. But this incorrect judgment from headquarters actually worsened the fuel leak. On the instrument panel, the computer started alerting the pilots to the low fuel. They needed to land ASAP. Since the crew couldn't determine which fuel tank had the leak, they had to turn on all the fuel pumps. Not long after, Flight 236 was left with only 620 kilograms of fuel on the left side. The engine on the right side of the plane stopped working. The captain, in order to maintain the aircraft's altitude for a little longer, set the left engine to maximum continuous thrust. But it didn't take long before the plane began to descend from an altitude of 39,000 feet. At 6:26, a faint golden light shone on the eastern horizon, but the captain and the co-pilot, in one of the most beautiful offices in the world, the cockpit of an aircraft, had no time to enjoy the beautiful sunrise. They were staring at the fuel gauge on the instrument panel. As the numbers hit 0, the left engine exhausted the last of the plane's fuel. Flight 236, at a distance from the alternate airport of 121 kilometers over the Atlantic Ocean, lost all power. The captain was now facing the challenge of not only gliding this 100-ton aircraft with precision to an airport more than 100 kilometers away, but after the double-engine failure, the aircraft's power supply, rudder, brakes, spoilers, and other key control systems had more or less lost full functionality. Under this pressure, Captain Pichet's left hand clenched not just the controls of the plane, but also the lives of 306 people. With over 16,000 hours of flight experience, Captain Pichet was facing a situation for the first time: a massive passenger jet with a double-engine failure. In this situation, energy management is the most critical issue during a gliding descent. At the beginning of the glide, the captain used a lower airspeed to descend as slowly as possible, trying to ensure that when the plane reached the vicinity of the airport, it would still have sufficient altitude. And behind him, 293 passengers under the command of the flight attendants were preparing for an emergency ditching in the Atlantic. Passengers wearing oxygen masks in the dark cabin could see the first light of dawn appearing through the windows. The plane was over the endless ocean, descending in silence. The fear of being on the brink of life and death enveloped them. Even the sound of air friction, the wind noise seeping into the cabin, seemed particularly harsh. 5 minutes after both engines failed, Air Transat Flight 236, with the assistance of controllers, arrived at a distance of 8 nautical miles from runway 33. The plane had now descended to 13,000 feet. This altitude, compared to a normal flight, was very high for this distance. But for Flight 236, this was good news. At least they had plenty of altitude to continue the descent. In order to keep the runway in sight at all times, Captain Pichet chose to circle to the left to continue losing altitude. During the circling process, the crew lowered the landing gear to increase drag, allowing the plane to descend faster. After making a rather large circle, Captain Pichet steered the plane towards Largesse Airport's runway 33. He found that after completing this circle, the plane was still too high and too fast. The captain did not use a rapid dive method to lose altitude, because the plane would accelerate as it dived. So on his final approach to the runway, Captain Pichet used a series of S-turns to bleed off the final excess altitude. After an experience that felt to the passengers like an aerial roller coaster, the plane aimed for the runway at 220 knots. For them, this unpowered plane had only one chance to land. 100. At 6:45, Flight 236, descending much faster than normal, 75 knots over the normal speed, silently touched down on the runway. The speeding plane bounced for more than 800 meters on the runway before finally settling. The captain immediately slammed on the brakes. Due to the failure of the anti-skid braking system, the plane started skidding left and right.
The remaining hydraulic pressure was only enough for one full brake application. Regardless, Captain Pichet had to bring them to a safe stop on the runway. Although the landing gear was slowing the plane down at full force, it was badly damaged. The airplane successfully and decisively came to a stop 730 meters from the end of the runway. Air Transat Flight 236, after running out of fuel over the Atlantic Ocean, had successfully made an emergency landing. All 293 passengers and 13 crew members, using the inflatable slides, were successfully evacuated from the aircraft. By checking the engine, investigators found the ruptured fuel line. The engineer who replaced the engine only realized during the investigation that they didn't just need to replace the fuel line. The hydraulic line connected to it should have also been replaced. Investigators found that if the crew members at the outset had identified the fuel leak and had not opened the crossfeed valve, they could have actually flown on 2 normally running engines with spare fuel all the way to the Azores. But the captain and the co-pilot, and indeed all A33 pilots at that time, even technical pilots, had not been trained to recognize a fuel imbalance as a sign of a fuel leak, or how to handle such a leak. So a lack of regulations and training made it difficult for the crew at the outset to identify the fuel leak and deal with the problem correctly. Captain Pichet, with his superb flying skills,
successfully brought the unpowered plane to a safe landing, preventing a disaster. He and the co-pilot received the International Airline Pilots Association's Superior Airmanship Award for their efforts. Following this emergency landing, the aircraft manufacturer revised its software to ensure that in the event of a fuel leak, pilots could understand the situation more clearly and intuitively. Airlines have also strengthened their pilot training for fuel leak scenarios.
It is precisely because of these safety improvements and enhancements that Captain Piché still maintains the record he set for flying an unpowered commercial airliner, gliding a world record of 121 kilometers. At the end of this video, I sincerely hope that this world record is one that no one will ever have to challenge again.